Just one little thing I wanted to mention before I move on with VIPER is this on button clicked prop. It's very simple, but it's neat when you have it because it really emphasizes the reusability of this component. This on button clicked, if you didn't have this prop, then it's not reusable at all, really, because then the functionality of what happens when you click the button is hard coded into this component. But as it is, this prop gets passed down to the button here. On click, button click. So any component using this button atom would be able to pass this on click as a prop and then do whatever it needs to do. I just wanted to mention that. I thought that was pretty important. Okay, so with VIPER, one criticism of the MVC pattern is that the controllers can tend to get bloated, and you have your entities or models, and it's clear what belongs in that layer. For example, if you have a library application, then some entities would be things like book or author and real world things like that often have a correlated database entity, and views are often representative of web pages or some other kind of UI that's presented to the user of your application. And everything in between are controllers. And then understandably, that's where the bulk of your code will be. It's where all the business logic will be found. But in order to kind of solve this issue of bloated controllers and build off the teachings of Bob Martin or Uncle Bob, VIPER tries to separate the view logic from the data model logic in order to get clean code. And I think Uncle Bob coined this term, clean code. Such a great name. After hearing about clean code, you have to learn more about it. If your code isn't clean, then it must be dirty, and that can't be a good thing. Anyway, I digress. So with a VIPER, you have a presenter that talks to the view and something called an interactor that talks to the model or entity. The point is, we're adding a further separation in our code, specifically in regards to functionality. This adheres to the single responsibility principle of solid design. If you don't know what solid design principles are, then I don't know what to say. Then just stop this video and just Google it and learn it, and then and when you're done, just deny that there was ever a time that you didn't know already what it was. When you have components that are serving multiple purposes, this violates that principle of single responsibility. VIPER solves this by breaking up the component into three parts. So there's the interactor that deals only with the async code and state variables, a presenter that acts like as a bridge between the interactor, what the interactor passes along, and what the component needs as props. Can lead to a more boilerplate, but when you want to build out components, but it more than pays off when it comes to understanding and reasoning about not only your code, but also the code of your coworkers. The separation of functionality is truly clean code, and it scales well, and it's easier to test, and it just makes, as you get further along in the application, it just makes everything easier. It's the very top layer. It's the to-do page. So if you remember in the last video, I said the to-do page was getting a little big, and that was foreshadowing. So what I've done now is I've broken it down. Here is the actual page, and look at this. Look how small it is. Look how simple it is to read. And so where did everything go? Well, as I mentioned, the interactor deals with a lot of times with what's coming from the outside into your component or into your application, and so essentially asynchronous calls. And so the functionality of fetching the to-dos happens here. And so this is what the interactor does. This seems a little bit weird, a little bit funny, like what's happening here. This is higher order components. I'm not going to get into higher order components because it took me a while to understand like what the hell that is. So that's a whole thing altogether. And if you don't have a good grasp of higher order components, then I suggest you Google it and get familiar with it because it's kind of important. And when somebody's using this component, this is what they would call the index TS, because this is what the to-do page gets wrapped with the presenter and it gets wrapped with the interactor. So what a component would get when they call this is a built-out version of that to-do page with whatever's happening here, whatever is happening there. Again, if that's confusing, then look into higher order components. Okay, so going back to the interactor, the refetching happens here, and this gets passed along to the presenter. And the presenter, as I mentioned, its only duty is to organize the data in such a way that it makes it easy for the actual component to deal with, I guess you could say. That's why this is so stripped down. That's why this looks so small. It's because all the work, all of the logic is being done here, right? And even whatever logic you can strip out of here and put it in a utility class, even better. But the point is, all of the stuff, the meat of it is in the presenter. And so it takes in the to-dos that are passed from the interactor and then organizes them. There's not much to organize here, but again, this whole time you have to envision a much bigger application where there will be things to modify or manipulate, and then this is where you would do it. The functionality for the clicking of the to-dos, the button clicks, it's all in this presenter. And this, again, just like atomic design, this will make the code cleaner, easier to look at, easier to reason about. And when you're working with a larger team, the code can quickly get confusing, and to know where to find certain functionality of components can get tricky. But if you have it broken down this way, it makes it a lot easier, because you know that things relating to outside calls would happen in the interactor, the logic would be in the presenter, and then the component is just laying out the rendering the information, or rendering the components that need to be rendered. That is about it. That's kind of all I wanted to say about VIPER. There's not a lot on. I don't think there's anything on it on YouTube when I was making this video. There's a lot about iOS development when it comes to VIPER, but it can be kind of applied here as well, as I've done here. So take a look at the code. I know it can get confusing. It can be really confusing at first, but once you play around with it, once you start using it on yourself, you'll really start to appreciate it. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to be going through all this boilerplate for a simple to-do application, but for a much bigger one, it makes a lot of sense. And the rest of the components are all pretty much the same. I don't think I touched any of so these wouldn't have an interactor or a presenter file because you don't need it. It's typically when you have fetch calls or asynchronous calls, then of course that's a sign you're going to need that interactor. Or if you have a lot of functionality for handling clicks, then you would need a presenter. But ideally what you want to do is pass this information along to your child component so that the child components are very reusable, because it takes away from the reusability a little bit when you have a presenter. It makes it a little bit more complicated when you have a presenter, because a parent then using that can still override a lot of things, but it just makes it a little bit, if you can avoid it, then that's probably better. But when you have something like this where all of the props can be passed along to the children, everything is nice and neat. All right, so I'll post the code below, and you can have a look if you have any questions about it. I'm no expert, so I'd love to hear any advice anyone else has to improve on what I've done. And yeah, that's it. Thank you for watching.